The Mishnah at the bottom of 26b. Matzah b'chanus. If you find something in a store, harei lushalo, it belongs to you. Bein hateva v'lachenvani, but if it's behind the counter, like between the counter and the storekeeper, where the storekeeper stands, shalchenvani, then it belongs to the storekeeper. Lifnei shulchani, if you found money in front of in a money changing place, harei lushalo, that belongs to you. But between the guy's chair the money changer, that belongs to the money changer. If you buy fruit or any kind of produce from somebody, or somebody sends to you a basket of fruit, and you find money in the package, belongs to you. But if they were tied up, bundled in an identifiable way, no telemachris, then you have to, as typically when you find something, you have to try to find the owner, because in that case there's a siman. Okay, Amar Balaser, even the money that's on top of on the counter belongs to you. So it's, in other words, there's no just because it's on the guy's counter, it doesn't mean it's his. It could have been somebody else left the money there. It could have actually belonged to somebody else, because that's where people put their money down. So, and then since it's just money and there's no siman, so then it belongs to you. So now we have Mishnah, lifnei shulchani, our Mishnah, that is, lifnei shulchani, if it's in front of the money changer, harei lushalo, that belongs to you. Kal gabe shulchan de shulchani, that implies that, so then implies that on the table, on the counter, the shulchani, hagavi shulchan, the shulchani. So if, like, it doesn't specify in our Mishnah, it says only specifically what's on the ground in front of the money changer belongs to you. But so that implies that if it's anywhere else, like on the counter, then it belongs to him, belongs to the storekeeper, the money changer. Gemara says Ema Seifa, but then look at the end. Between the chair and the guy, that belongs to him. That implies that if it's on the counter, then it belongs to him. It belongs to you, the finder. So the Mishnah leaves this kind of critical middle case unaddressed, right? And the implication from the two clauses is contradictory. Where it says so you can't tell, right? In the on the table, you can't tell from our Mishnah what is the rule. We're saying the Mishnah simply doesn't address that situation, on the table. Rabbi Lazar Haman. So in that case, what is Rabbi Lazar? What's his source? Amarava Masisin Kashise. The Mishnah is difficult to understand. My area, the Tane Ben Akise L'Shulchani Shel Shulchani Litne Ala Shulchan. So going back to what similar to what we just said, like, why are you specifying between the chair and the money changer? The Mishnah should say on the table, right? That's in front of him. So that, since it didn't, as we said before, that implies that they belong to you, the finder, iname, or maybe he got it from the other side. Masa b'shulchanus. Or the Mishnah could say, if you find it anywhere in the shop, it belongs to you. Kidduktani Reisha. Like the first case, like the storekeeper, like, why making a difference between the money changer's shop and the storekeeper's shop? Ella Shmamina. So the conclusion is, according to Rabbi Lazar, Afilu Munachin al Gabi Shulchan Arei Shelo. So his implication from the Mishnah is, even if it's on the counter, it belongs to you, the finder. Okay. Halokeach peros mechavero. Mishnah said, if you buy something from your friend, and you find money in the package. So the Mishnah said that money belongs to you unless it's wrapped up in an identifiable way. Amar Rish Lakish Rabbi Yanai. Rish Lakish says Lo Shanu Ella look at Mina Tagar. That's if you're buying from like a professional, um, like from a retailer, right? Where you buy. The retailer buys things from a bunch of wholesalers and then he sells it to you, puts together what you want. But if you're just like, if I go next door to you and I say, sell me some, I'm out of sugar, sell me some sugar, right? If you're not a professional or retailer, then you can assume that the money belongs to your friend that you bought it from, okay? Because the retailer, he's packaging things from different places. He may have, put something in that didn't belong to him. It may have been from his suppliers, so it's unclear who it belongs to. Therefore, it's a Metzia without a simon, and you can keep it. V'chein tane, Tanakami de Rav Nachman. And similarly, the Tana before Rav Nachman said the following: Lo shanu ela tagar. It's only the Mishnah only applies to when you're buying from a retailer. Just as we just said. I'm away with Nachman. So Nachman said, like even my sugar example was a bad example. It's like the private person, the non-retailer that you bought something from, like he wasn't involved in these goods from the field to his house. He didn't necessarily harvest and thresh and whatever. Somebody else was involved, so maybe it was their money that got into the package somehow. So why do you assume it belongs to the guy you bought it from? On the way. So the answer to Rav Nachman was Ismay. Like, okay, so did I get it wrong? Like, should I take back what I said? I'm like, well, Rav Nachman says no, don't take it back. To targame masnisa. You should interpret it as follows: Kigon shadashan alidei avda v'shivchasa kananim. When sure, maybe all the work wasn't done by the guy, but maybe this only applies where the work was done by people under his control or whose things he owns, right? So if you buy something from someone whose slaves did all the processing, so even if they lost money, it wasn't their money, it was your money, right? It was the guy, your friend's money, the guy who sold it to you. So if that's the case, there's no other conclusion other than this is his money that got in there, and that's why you have to return it. So it's a qualification of this case. Okay. Next Mishnah. So, when the Torah talks about an Aveda, it says, I'll sell Salmal, Kol Aveda, sheep and clothing and whatever. So clothing was included in the things that can be classified as a lost item. Why did it get specified specifically? To make a comparison. I'll tell you, just as clothes is like identifiable, it can be identified and can be demanded back by the owner. So too, you can't just keep something, and you can't keep anything like clothing that you find without trying to return it to the owner. So now the Gemara wants to know, my bichlal kol elu, what does it mean included in everything? Amarava bichlal kol aveda sachita. When the Torah describes this, it says anything that your brother loses, that your fellow citizen loses, has to be returned to him. So that would have included clothing. The reason clothing was specified is, as the Mishnah said, to tell you what kinds of things you have to return and what you can keep. Amarava. Lamali, now the Gemara is going to get a little more specific. As I said, it says I'll shor, I'll chamor, I'll sell, salma, I'll call aveda, right? It specifies ox, donkey, sheep, and clothing. All of these things it specifies outside of after stating the general rule. So why does it do that? You need all four of those things: shor, chamor, and salma. Because Rahman Simla, if it only had written about clothing, I would think Hanimile Be'edim de Gufa. That is that what do you have to return? Only when there's witnesses about the thing itself, the simanim dugufa, or where there's identifying marks on it. In other words, only if you can, I would think you can only have to return something if the owner can prove that it's his, either with witnesses or with simanim. Aval chamor be'edim du'ukaf. But in the case of a donkey, where you could identify the donkey not necessarily by the donkey itself, but by its saddle. Okay, the simanim dukaf. In other words, if there were witnesses that says, yeah, this is so and so's saddle, or the guy identifies the saddle by whatever marks it has, whatever characteristics it has, and so if we only said simla, where where it's the thing itself that's identified, maybe that's when you have to give it back or look for the owner. But if it's not the thing itself, but something attached to it, like the donkey with the saddle, maybe I wouldn't have to. So therefore, the Torah says chamor. No, even a chamor, which is identifiable by not necessarily by its own self, but by the saddle on it, you still have to give that back. So even if it's even a chamor which is identified by the saddle. So why then does the Torah also add or an ox or a lamb have to be returned? Is enough. An ox tells you that not only the ox itself, but even the shearing of its tail. So Rashi over here explains, he doesn't know shafilu seyar shebesof hazanav yachzir. Like even this minor thing that's not even worth a pruta has to be returned. And the same, why does it also tell you specifically a lamb has to be returned? Look, he's also that the shearing of the wool, like if while you have the thing in your possession needs to be sheared, you have to return that sheared wool to the owner as well. So Gemara asks an obvious question. If you're already telling me that the hairs on the tail of the ox, which are basically worthless, still have to be returned, then certainly something that has value, the shearings of a sheep, that certainly has to be returned to the owner. Alamarava. So again, we have the question: why does it say both shor and seh? Alamarava chamor debor l'Rabbi Yehuda. The said Aveda l'divrei kasha. So he's saying that the use of donkey, which in another context the Torah uses as an example of something that can be damaged by falling into a pit. Okay, when the Torah describes the damages of bor, it says kif tachish bor, v'nafal shama shora chamor. An ox or donkey fall into it. Okay, so a chamor, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says you have the prevailing opinion about chamor is that like live things that fall into a bore and get damaged, that's what the bore digger is responsible for. But Rabbi Yehuda says no, even inanimate objects. So then, like according to Rabbi Yehuda, what does it even say chamor for in the first place about a bore? So here too, we would say, like, why does it say chamor? It's difficult to understand. The said Aveda and the word "seh" about in our case of an aveda, which it's why use this as a sample of what can be lost? Like, what does that doesn't really add anything. Kasha, indeed, it's difficult. Like, in other words, we don't have an answer to why the Torah lists all these things as specific examples of an aveda. They should all be included in the rule. So in other words, Rav is saying, yeah, we don't have an answer to this. Gemara says ve'ema, but maybe you could say l'gvalim hudiyasa. Maybe it includes even the dung produced by the animal has to be returned. Maybe that's what's being included here. More answers, no, that we can assume nobody wants that, right? The guy may want his sheep back, the owner, but we assume that the owner gives up on, concedes ownership of the dung that the animal produces. So you do not have to return that. So that is not what specifying seh or any of these things could come to teach us. So we're still back to Rava saying we don't know why. There's no good reason why the Torah lists these specific things. Vidilma, the Gemara says maybe here's another possibility. L'sibani b'diasa.
But before going on, dung actually has value. It's good fertilizer.
Yeah, but I guess that the idea is that while it's not under your control, it's like you don't think you're going to ever get that back, right?
Okay.
Your sheep takes a dump in the street. You're like, I'm worried about my sheep, but I'm not expecting to get back that, right? So yeah, it has value if it's under your control, but when it's not under your control, you're basically giving up on it. So where it says maybe adding the specific example of the sheep, that is itself comes to tell you that about simanim, that the whole idea that if something is identifiable, it has to be returned. Because we have this question, simanim d'oraisa d'rabbanan. We don't know if the idea of being identifiable is a d'oraisa or a rabbinic thing. So Chasar says, so maybe that's the reason the Torah writes a sheep, because a sheep is identifiable. That you have to give it back through the identifying marks, the simanim d'oraisa, and that would show that, in other words, that simanim is a Torah requirement. So Gemara says, no, Amrei, we could answer, Mida katani l'hutana l'simanim gabe simla. We already know that from simla, from clothing, right? The fact that the Torah listed clothing as one of the lost items you have to return, and we know that clothing has identifying marks. So we already know that the katani, as we taught, masim la miuchedas yesh basiman yesh lo tovim chayv l'hachlis. Just as clothing is identifiable, and so that you have to try to give back. So to anything that has simanim, you have to give back. So we have from our mission to sell love simanim udiasa. So we already know that from the fact that the Torah lists clothing. So we still don't have a good reason why the Torah lists sheep. So it's actually kind of strange, because in almost every instance, the Gemara is very thorough in identifying what each word or even each letter teaches us. And the fact that it doesn't have any explanation for why these four things are listed would seem to confound the whole system, right? Like if you don't have...
I was wondering about that, because we say that
like
nothing's superfluous in the Torah.
Right. It's like when, Rabbi Akiva would have a reason for every word S in the Torah, right? And when he had a question about one of them and he couldn't figure it out, he was going to throw away his whole system until somebody explained it to him and said, yeah, S, what is it? Es Hashem L'checha Tira, right? God, who else do you fear besides God? The answer is Talmidei Chachamim. But if he hadn't had that answer, it sounded like he was ready to ditch the whole thing, right? To ditch his whole hermeneutical principle. So I don't know what to say about that. I mean, you could just say that whatever tradition or whatever we're supposed to know from this, it has just been lost. Like we don't know what it is. It doesn't undermine the whole system. It's just that we've lost part of the tradition. We don't know what the answer is, but it doesn't undermine the whole hermeneutical system. Maybe that's what you could say. I don't know. Tana Rabbanan. New topic. Asher Toved. Asher Tovad. You have to return an object which is lost. The Torah says which is lost. So what does this phrase have to tell us? Prat laveda she'ein bo shava pruta. Something that is lost, meaning it's like lost to the owner, means he misses it. It has to have some value to it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, so something that has no value, or less than the pruta's value, would not be subject to the laws of returning. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, umitzasa. On the other hand, it says anything that your brother loses and you find it. Only something that's worth finding, right? So that's how he excludes. So he comes to the same conclusion, but from a different word. Now, what's the difference between these two views? How you understand, like, the meaning of the words and how you make the drasha, that's the difference. The one who uses the phrase something that you lose, something that is lost. So, I mean, we're not really answering the question here. It's just what the words imply to them. Okay. They're both implying the same, they're both getting the same implication, but from different words. So then, okay, so then if each one has to explain why the other word is there that they're not using. That so the Tanakama who says Asher Tovad implies something that's losable, but what does he do with the word umitzasa, something that you find? The asaliyade mashma, it's like only something that comes into your hand, comes under your control, counts as something that you found. One second. Okay, so the note here explains that once you have taken control over something, once you've picked it up, that's when the full responsibility of returning it comes into play. Okay. Now, how about the other one that gets from the word something that you found? That implies it has to be valuable. So, what is the implication of the word something that was lost? That implies what Rabbi Yochanan says. If you have something being swept away in the river, Shahi Muteris, then that is no longer classified as something you have to return, because presumably the owner figures he's never going to see it again. It's been taken away by the river. Nobody's going to find it and return it to me. Where do you get that from? That he gets from the word something that you found it. Misha avuda hemanu something that's findable. It has to be returned. Yes, but something swept away by the river. He has no expectation that anybody's ever going to find this again. So if you do find it, then it's hefker and you can keep it. Vidach. So what about the other one? So how do you know if you're Rabbi Yehuda? Where do you get the idea of Rabnai that we just saw from Umatsasa? Nafle Umatsasa. So yeah, he gets the same thing from the same word. Vidach. And the other one, from Asher Tovad Mimanu. Vidach. So one second. So the first one is like from umatzasa, from and you find it. So the extra vav makes it imply both, and asher tovad mimanu is an extra word mimanu. Vidach. So what do you need the whole phrase for? Mimanu lo mashalai. So yeah, the other one, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that the word mimanu is an extra word in the first place. Okay. again, that's a classic dodge of the Gemara to say that, yeah, this word implies one thing to something to one party and not to another view. Ravam, our pruta shahuzla ikebenayu. Here's another suggestion for the difference between Rabbi Tanakh and Rabbi Yehuda. What happens if, when it was lost, it was worth something, and then while it was, being kicked around the street or whatever, exposed to the elements, it lost value, and now it's no longer a shavapruta. So it was lost as something that. So if you derive it from something that was lost, that has to be worth losing. It was worth losing at the time, so you do have to give it back. But the one who says that umetzasa, that it's when you find it that you determine if it's a findable object, if it's worth a shav pruta. Now it's not worth a pruta anymore, so you can keep it. You don't have to give it back. Mandi amar me'asher tovad ika. Mandi amar umetzasa leka, or as I just said. So Gemara doesn't like that. But you need both, right? Like, just because you derive this from Asher Tovad, right, that it has to be worth something when you lose it, but it also says like, why are you rejecting that one? So we're not happy with this approach, because there's no reason to reject. For each one to reject the position of the other. Ella, we'll try again. A difference between the Tanakh and Rabbi Yehuda. Pruta shehukra ikabenau. What if it got lost? It was valueless, and then suddenly there's a spike in the price of the material, and now it has value. So mandi amar sasa ika. So if you say it's from the time that you find it, and now it's worth something, so you do have to return it. Mandi amar asher tovad, but one who says that it's at the time it was lost, it did not have value. Leka, you wouldn't have to return it. So again, the Gemara says not a good way to go here. Mandi amar mitzasa habina asher tovad leka. Like, you still have to explain the other word. So that is not a valid difference between these two views. So the Gemara is going to try again. You know where there's a difference between these two opinions? When you lost it, it was worth something, and then it lost value, and then the market went up and it gained value again. So Mandi Amar Asher Tovad Ika. So the one who says that the Torah determines it has to have value when it was lost, it did have value when it was lost, and when it was found, it also has value. But the one who says it only has we go by the value when it was found. Be'inan de'isba shir Metzia mishas aveda v'yad shas Metzia. That you might say you require that it has to be the whole time, it has to be worth something, and in this case it had lost value to the point where it was worthless at some point, even before you found it, and so according to Rabbi Yehuda, you would not have to return it. Okay, it's a bit of a stretch. I mean, I liked it better when they said, yeah, they both say the same thing. Just from different words, but the Gemara has managed to construct a case where there would be a difference between these two views. Far-fetched although it may be. Ibailu. We'll ask a question. Simanim deraisa d'Rabbanan. So we touched on this a minute ago. The idea that you have to, that if the only way to identify whose this was is through identifying marks, then you have to return to them. Is that a Torah law or a rabbinic law? Might ask him, what's the difference? You have to give it back. So be careful if it's a Torah law or not. La adure get isha b'simanim. The difference would be a get, a divorce, right? If you say that it's that the identifying it through simanim is doraisa, then it's valid to give it back, right? You can't just give someone a get if it's not really her get. right? So, but if it's Doraisa that she can prove it's hers, then it's hers, then we're good. But if it's only a rabbinic law, ki avid Rabbanan takanta b'mamana. Like, when would they say that we can determine, we have the power to determine who this really belongs to? That's when it comes to monetary things. I'll be sure law of Rabbanan takanta. They wouldn't do it when it comes to Isurim, when it comes to determining the marital status of this person. Okay, so Tashma. Let's see if we can prove it one way or the other. So we just went through this, right? Even in the general rule that included clothing. That's why did the Torah list it separately? Something you have to return lahaki shela to do the comparison. Just as clothing can be identified, then you have to return it. Afko. You have to try and find the owner. So that would seem to prove that it's a doraisa because it comes from a word in the Torah. Where it says Tana Tovin Istrachale. Simanim Kedinasba. Maybe the Tana that wrote this Mishnah, that taught this Mishnah, he's not being specific. Like we said, something, clothing is something that has identifying marks, and it has someone coming to look for it and to identify it properly. So maybe it wasn't being specific, right? Maybe just mention simanim by the way, and not basically an inexact language. So we're not accepting that as proof. Maybe the biblical obligation is sheish latovin, that someone comes and demands it and proves it's his. Toshma, here's another attempt at a proof. Chamor b'siman yukaf. Again, we just saw this. A chamor, or the donkey, you can, if it has an identifiable saddle, that should be returned. So by the fact that the Torah included the word chamor, right? So doesn't that make it biblical? So when it says ema be'ede ukaf, no, maybe it doesn't mean simanim. Maybe it doesn't mean that there's identifiable marks. Rather, that there are witnesses that says, yes, we know this saddle belongs to so and so, and therefore we assume the chamor belongs to so and so. Maybe that's what the Torah is telling us with chamor, just the witnesses. Tashma, try again. So you keep this found thing until your brother comes looking for it. Like, of course you have to wait until someone comes looking for it. You don't know whose it is. Ella darshehu imramayhu oena ramai. What it's telling us is, like, test him out. Like, when he comes to look for it, it's telling you, like, you can cross-examine him to that he has to prove that it's his. I love the simanim, which would imply that how's he going to identify it? With simanim, identifying marks. So doesn't that prove that if this is a drasha from the Torah, that it proves that identifying marks is from the Torah? So Morris says, lo, ba'edim, same answer as before. Maybe the proof that he has to bring, or the cross-examination that he has to pass, is by bringing witnesses. And maybe simanim isn't from the Torah. Tashma, I'll try again. Ein me'idin ela al partsuf hapani. So the witnesses trying to identify this donkey have to identify it by its face. Im hachotem, with the nose. Even though there are other marks on the body or on the things that it's carrying. Shmamina simanon lav d'oraisa. So that implies you can't use the saddle. You can't use these other simanim. They have to directly recognize the animal. Where it says Amrei Gufo de Arotz V'Guts. Maybe we're talking about the Gufo, like the identifying marks that are not accepted, are that it was long or it was short, right? And Kalev the Chashinin l'Sheila. So maybe like the long, the simanim of the body, maybe we're talking about things that aren't really simanim. I had a small donkey. Well, there's a lot of small donkeys, right? No, you have to. So we're saying you have to identify it by its face. But saying you can't say it was a small donkey as a simon doesn't invalidate siman. It means that this isn't a good simon. And Kayla, what about the things that it's wearing, the chashin l'sheila, because that's not a thing. You might be using somebody else's kelim. That doesn't help you identify a particular living being. So Gemara says, aha. If you're going to say that you can't use clothing or saddles, like the saddle could be borrowed. So don't tell me that the saddle is a good sim on them. My answer is ukaf lo shulay and ukrafa. No, people don't borrow saddles. Mishum the muskev la lachavra, because it's fitted to the donkey, right? Nobody's going to use a different saddle because the saddle gets shaped to the donkey, and it's with just borrowing somebody else's saddle would be uncomfortable for the donkey. So people don't do that. So a saddle is actually a good simon, even though it's not the donkey itself, but it's a good identifier for the donkey. You might say, or you could say Kalev b'chivre uv'sumke. The kalim we're talking about is, again, it's not as specific. It's like was wearing red clothes or white clothes. Like there are a lot of red clothes and white clothes. That's not a good enough simon, but a real simon would be okay. Elohana Tanya. Now the Gemara is addressing the thing about the saddle, that you wouldn't borrow a saddle, but we have a counter argument. Mitzvah kosher v'kiso ba'arniku b'tabas. We're talking about a divorce. Okay, a shaliach is delivering a divorce, and he loses it, and then he finds it tied to a wallet or a bag of money, purse, or wallet, or a ring, or you find it among your own stuff in your suitcase. Let's say I feel lose manru, right? Even a long time later, kosher. You can assume that is the actual divorce that you were charged with delivering, and you can continue with your mission. Now, if you want to say that we're worried about maybe it's borrowed, right? Why would you say that if it's tied to your wallet? Why is that? Why is it valid? Maybe your wallet was borrowed by somebody, and that other person put this other divorce into it, and it's not the divorce you were supposed to give. Where says, "I'm right. He's right. Who lends wallets, right? I don't lend you my wallet." So that's not a realistic thing. So if you find it in, and why there's why don't I lend you my wallet? So the Gemara says because it's considered like I'm lending you my luck, right? Like if I lend you my wallet, then I'm giving you my something. This is a superstition with the bas mishum b'mezayef, and I don't lend you my signet ring because you could use it falsely, right? So that's not something I'm going to lend you. I'm not going to give you my corporate seal because like what else would you use it for other than to forge a document? So that's why these things, if the get is attached to them, we assume that there's no lending going on. And if there's a get in there attached to it, that was the get that you always had in your possession. It's the one that you're supposed to deliver. Maybe this is an argument of Tanaim. Ein me'idin al hashuma. Witnesses can't identify a dead body to testify that someone's dead and the wife can remarry. You can't, the identifying mark for that can't be a shuma, which he translates here as a wart. Elazar ben Mahavai Omer Midin al Shuma. Rabbi Elazar says that yes, it is a good identifier. My love, maybe this is the argument. Maybe marks, these identifying marks, is a rabbinic thing, and so a wart, which is an identifying mark, is only rabbinic, and you can't use that to end a biblical marriage. Rabbi Elazar ben Mahavai Savra de Simani Doraisa, but Rabbi Elazar says no, it is a Doraisa, and so it is valid to identify someone and prove that he's dead. Rava says no. No, everybody holds simanim were biblical. What are we arguing about here? Like here we're talking about a wart. So maybe like everybody of that age has a wart, or many people have warts. So Marsavar Shuma Mitsuya Ben Gilo. One holds that this is a common thing, so the wart doesn't really identify someone definitely. Marsavar Shuma Sheina Mitsuya Ben Gilo. Then says no, this is an identifiable mark. It's unique. It is unusual enough that it's good enough to identify someone by same, or you could explain the argument. No, everybody says this is a rare thing to find, and so it's a good siman. That's when the person's alive, but maybe after death, changes take place, right? One says after death, you could develop a wart, or the wart could go away or change or whatever, and therefore it's not a good identifier. The other says no, things like that don't happen after death, so it's a good identifier. Or there's another explanation. Everybody agrees there's no changes going on here after death. The simanim drabanan and simanim are rabbinic only. Here we're talking about is a wart considered a unique identifier? Marsavar Shuma Siman Muvaku, Marsavar Shuma Lav Siman Muvaku. And they're just arguing about whether it's unique enough to make a proper identification. Okay, so I think maybe it's 8:30, right? So maybe we'll stop here and let David pick it up here tomorrow.
Yasher Kohan.
Yeah, because now we're getting into there's no good place to stop. Although I'm losing a bit of a big change tomorrow. All right, we'll do the best we can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.